happy Sunday again to each and every one of you. I want to move quickly in the interest of time. Time moves so quickly when you're having such a good time. So we are in the last week of our series, and we have taken a wonderful journey looking at the wisdom of the Tao Te Ching. We started in week 1, the whole world in your hands. Looking at the verse that says we must unite our male side with our female side, we must unite our light side with our dull or dim or seemingly dark side, recognizing, as I talked about there, that the great unity that Lao Tzu speaks of and writes about in the text is when we bring all of our sides together. And I'm not just talking about in the sense of bringing Republican and Democrat together, which would be wonderful. But what I talked about on that Sunday was the idea that even on the progressive side, we actually have a lot of factions and splintering. And so that's why we haven't actually experienced the great power that is possible to bring about change, because we need to unite every side. In week 2, the hidden creator, Lao Tzu writes about the creator, the hidden creator, being feminine, and that we must get to know her and we must love her. And I talked about the creative process, which is foundational to New Thought, this idea that there is a creative process which is happening on the universal level and it is happening on the individual level. Spirit, mind, and body, conscious mind, subconscious mind, and manifestation. And that middle portion, mind itself, is the feminine aspect, and we must understand the attributes of the hidden creator. We must understand the hidden attributes of mind itself so that we can actually create the world that we want. I invite you to go back to that, because very, very, just so many wonderful things there when you look at the hidden creator. Last week, the way of the warrior. Lao Tzu writes about the wisdom of warriors, and he talks about how warriors actually operate in a very different way than we would think. One is that a warrior actually works with the law, works with natural law, works with spiritual law. And he writes that if any warrior tries to defy natural law, he will surely be defeated. He also talks about, one of the last things we spoke of last week was this idea of the warrior who thinks they have an enemy is the warrior that loses. And so the way of the warrior is to understand that you have no enemy. So we've had a pretty, and interesting is not even a good word, but we've had just a news cycle that is unprecedented this week, right? $1.6 billion in the lottery. We went from that to the couple that was killed in Louisville, Kentucky, Maurice Stollard, I want to speak their names, and Vicki Jones. The gentleman, actually, we know now, he tried to go to a local black church and tried to get in and pulled on the doors. Unfortunately, the doors were locked. And it said that there were about 70 people in that church just about a half hour before he got there. There were still about 8 to 10 people that were still in the church, but he couldn't get in because it was locked. He left the church and then went to the grocery store, opened fire, and killed Maurice Stollard and Vicki Jones. They were pronounced dead on the scene. And then we have the now 14 pipe bombs that were sent through the mail. One of the most unprecedented, coordinated assassination attempts we've ever seen in this country. 2 former presidents, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, senators, members of the media. And then yesterday, we have 11 dead, and as of the most recent news reports, we still have 2 that are in critical condition, as a gunman opened fire at the Tree of Life Synagogue yesterday. Now, in moments like this, first let me just, as a word of advice to protect your own consciousness, that you don't have to immerse yourself in the news, right? You don't have to know the latest, each little piece, each little part of it, because what's absolutely true is every time you read the stories, every time you go back into it, you're actually re-traumatizing yourself, right? There's something known as vicarious trauma, right? And so it's very important that it's okay to be informed, and we want to be informed, and we love our brothers and sisters, and we want to stand in solidarity, and we want to mourn with those that mourn. But please do not immerse yourself in the news. I invite you, sometimes I think when we do that, we're trying to, we feel like that's a way to show we care. Like, if I'm watching and staying up on what's going on, I want the people in Pittsburgh to know that I care. I want the families of those in Kentucky to know that I care. Look for ways to serve. Yes. because that will actually help to raise your own vibration of feeling good, but then you're actually being a beneficial presence on the planet. You're actually contributing to that which will actually change the trajectory of what we're experiencing in this country. Now, as we look at the extremes that are taking place in our world and in our nation, there is a way that we, on the spiritual side, or on the spiritual path, must look at the world if we want to be the change that we seek. In the midst of this devastating news, right? In the midst of not only the attempted shooting at a church, but then the murder of Maurice Stallard and Vicki Jones, the attempted bombings with the pipe bombs, and the murder of the 11 in Pittsburgh. How do we, on the spiritual path, look at these events and look at the world so that we can be the change that we seek? And so I take us to verse 29, this verse that has really informed our series this month. And Lao Tzu writes this: "Those who look down upon this world will surely take hold and try to change things. But this is a plan I've always seen fail. The world is Tao's own vessel. It is perfection manifest. It cannot be changed, it cannot be improved. For those who go on tampering, it's ruined. For those who try to grasp, it's gone. Allow your life to unfold naturally. Know that it too is a vessel of perfection. Just as you breathe in and breathe out, sometimes you're ahead and other times behind. Sometimes you're strong and other times weak. Sometimes you're with people and other times alone. To the sage, all of life is a movement toward perfection. So what has need of he or she for the excessive, the extravagant, or the extreme?" Interesting perspective, right? Sounds like Lao Tzu is telling us that we shouldn't do anything about what's going on in the world, that we shouldn't be activists. Now, what I understand is that in today's climate, in the social and political climate, I think far too many of us have gotten into this posture of looking outside of ourselves to find out if all is well. Right? Because if it looks like our side is winning, whichever side that is, that's your business, and then we feel like life is good, right? If the stocks are up, then we feel like life is good. If unemployment is down, then we're being told that life is good. If Trump is in the White House or not in the White House, then life is bad. If Brett Kavanaugh is the Supreme Court justice, then life is bad. We do the same thing. If you think about it, that's on the national level, right? Social and political, but we do the same thing. You know, if our lovers and loved ones act a certain way, then all is well, right? When they say the right things, then all is well. If our family members or our children act right, then all is well. Co-workers, our boss, the barista at Starbucks, right? Depending on how they act, then that determines how our day moves forward, right? And what I've come to understand, and as I was thinking and reflecting on it this week, what we're really doing in that moment is gambling away our joy. Right? Because it's like, I can't be in joy unless these things happen, or these people are acting right, or this person is in this seat of power, or this economic indicator is in a certain place, or this statistic says I'm good, or this statistic says I can be wealthy, or this statistic says I can be healed. If I don't see those things, then what I've essentially done is gambled away my joy. And what Lao Tzu is inviting us to understand is that from this higher perspective, there's a way to live in joy at all times, because the sage understands that all of life is a movement toward our perfection. And as I thought about that higher perspective, it reminded me of something. I'm sure many of you heard it. The morning after the presidential election, and we all knew that Donald Trump had won, and President Obama addressed the nation, and there was something specific that he said, and I bring my mind back to it over and over and over again, because he's talking from this place. And what he said there from the Rose Garden, he said, "I said to the American people," this was the previous day, "regardless of which side you were on in the election, regardless of whether your candidate won or lost, the sun would come up in the morning." And he said, that one thing I got right. He said, the sun is up. And he went on to say, he said, you know, the path that this country has taken has never been a straight line. We zig and zag. Sometimes we move in ways that some people think is forward and others think is moving back, and that's okay. And this is echoing exactly what Lao Tzu is saying. He's saying, just as you breathe in and breathe out, sometimes you're ahead and other times behind. Sometimes you're strong and other times weak. Sometimes you're with people and other times alone. But what we understand is that that movement, in the same way, and I love that he talks about breathing in and breathing out. When you exhale, are you ever worried, like, oh no, I just released all my air. What in the world am I going to do? Because there is no air in my lungs. And so we take this simplicity because we understand the correspondence of all nature, as above, so below. So if that is true of your body, that must be true cosmically, that must be true universally, that must be true spiritually. And so in the same way, we know that even when we see things like 45 in the White House, which is the experience of no air in our lungs, we know that what? We know that what? There's more air, and we will, by law, we must breathe in again. There's an ebb and flow. Now there's something a bit disturbing, and I'm sure you all heard it. Lao Tzu, is he telling us that we can't change the world, that we shouldn't be activists? And he says, those who look down upon this world will surely take hold and try to change things, but this is a plan I've always seen fail. Interesting. Interesting. Now, first I would offer, I think we got to go back to week 1, understanding that actually when you unite everything together, right, and come to this place of great unity, then, and that's the only way that really change can happen, because we're moving out of the place of oneness, and we're really aligned with that higher reality that is God's reality. But also, as we talked about last week, the warrior works with natural law. So if you're working with natural law, you're not trying to change the world outside of you, because you understand natural law teaches us what? As within, so without. So you're not going to try to change your brother, your sister, your children, the government. You don't go out there first. You got to see the change within yourself. I've shared this before, and it's coming to me now. I was working with a group of activists. We were in a meeting, a group of activists from Brazil. And if you don't know, there's so much going on in Brazil right now. They're about to elect like Trump on steroids, really, in Brazil. But outside of that, the police killings of our black brothers and sisters in Brazil, what's happening in the United States just pales in comparison to what's happening in Brazil and in the favelas. But we were having a conversation and a dialogue with the activists, and one of the questions came up. The question was, what is your end goal? What would it look like? What would the world look like if everything you wanted changed and life was good? And nobody could articulate it. Nobody could articulate it. So we recognize, and so what happens is we're constantly out here in the external trying to change, but we've never created a picture within ourselves. The reason why the scripture says without a vision the people perish is because that word, perish, is not even the best word. What the better translation is, without a vision the people cast off restraint. And what does that mean? It would be, it's like restraint in the sense of your vision conforms you to a certain mode, to a certain place. You know where you're going, right? You set your GPS, that's where it's going. And so without a setting in your GPS, you ain't gonna get to where you're going. And so it's not about perishing in the sense you're going to die if you don't have a vision. It's not, it has nothing to do with that. But it simply means there is nothing pointing you in a certain direction. There's no restraint, right? And so in the same way, if we're working with natural law and we understand as within, so without, we have to create that picture from within. We have to ask ourselves, what does the world that works for everyone look like? We must begin with the idea of perfection. We must begin with the originating thought of good and only good, because that's what God is. God's mind is good and only good. That's the originating thought. Now what happens, the reason why we create what we perceive to be bad or what we call bad is it's a reflection of our resistance to that which is good. I used this analogy last week, but it's similar, right? That the thoughts that we hold are like if we had a pipe that was dirty. The water is neutral, right? The water is clean when it comes to the pipe, but whatever is in the pipe, that water then carries and then it shows up on the other end, and we think, oh, this water is dirty. The water's not dirty, it's what's in the pipe. And what's in the pipe are our beliefs or lack of belief. And so we recognize that then if we come back to the originating idea, one, that the water is neutral, the water is always clean, is always good, but also it's abundant, it's always there, ever flowing. And here's where we get to this idea. I love this in Ernest Holmes, Science of Mind. This is like textbooks Ernest Holmes. Perfect God, perfect human, perfect being, right? It just says perfect man, but I like to adjust Ernest Holmes to include everybody. Perfect God, perfect human, perfect being. And he writes this in the text. It is the practitioner's business to uncover God in every man or woman. God is not sick. God is not poor. God is not unhappy. God is never afraid. God is never confused. God is never out of his place. The premise upon which all mental work is based is perfect God, perfect man, perfect being. First, perfect God, then perfect man. There is a spiritual man or spiritual person, spiritual human, who is never sick, who is never poor, unhappy, never confused, nor afraid, who is never caught by negative thought. And so we recognize that this is the place that we have to operate from. The idea of looking down upon the world and trying to take hold and change it is not how change happens. The way change happens is to come to this place of understanding perfect God, perfect you, perfect being. And there is always a perfect blueprint. That blueprint exists now. The world that works for everyone exists in the mind of God. It exists in the non-physical. How do we know it exists? Because any time that you don't feel good about what's going on, we don't feel good about what's going on in this country, we don't feel good about what happened in Pittsburgh, and it immediately calls us, as Abraham talks about, it sends out a rocket of desire. It immediately calls for the opposite experience. It immediately calls for a moment and a time where churches will never consider having armed guards as our president recommended in church so that nobody gets killed. And so we recognize that world, that thought, it exists in our mind now, where we know that churches are free places and places of freedom where everybody can go, just like our schools. We never have to think or worry about or get concerned about the safety of our teachers or of our students, because we know school is the safest place on the planet. And so as that idea has already been given birth, that's the perfect God, perfect man, and then perfect being, then we must become the thing to allow that to come into being. And this is why I love, he goes on in the text, he says, and this happens in our minds. In our individual minds. So this is why I love where Lao Tzu says, to the sage, in the mind of the sage, in the mind of the metaphysician, in the mind of the person on the spiritual path, understands that all of life is a movement toward our wholeness. So the sage sees what's happening, as we talked about today, and say, oh, there's a healing going on. The sage sees what's going on and says, oh, I'm being shown that there's cancer in the body of the United States of America, and we need to heal. And then we recognize, of course, as we think about this metaphysically, right, that all dis-ease is related to thought, right? That we know our body responds to what we're thinking. And so we have this awesome opportunity to say, what are we thinking in consciousness as citizens of the United States of America? And what thoughts do we need to be thinking as citizens of the United States of America in order to shift and change? Because otherwise, if we're not asking those questions, we're just gambling away our joy. We're looking, I remember saying this was years ago now, after, what's his name, Zimmerman, after he was acquitted. And one of the things that was so present for me in that moment was, I said, folks were sitting around that Saturday night like it was watch night when, after the Emancipation Proclamation and everybody knew we were going to be free, right? We were sitting around waiting to see if a verdict was going to tell us if we're free or not. That's what gambling away your joy looks like. Yes, I am not happy about Brett Kavanaugh having a Supreme Court justice seat. But I recognize that if I let where his behind is sitting have anything to do with my joy, have anything to do with me thinking about what my possibilities are for life, have anything for me thinking about the safety of my daughter or of my loved ones or of Yolanda or any other woman on this country, I recognize that I got to operate from a different place. Because otherwise I give that man way too much power. This is the perspective when you look and understand that to the sage, all of life is a movement toward our wholeness. Sometimes we're breathing out, sometimes we're breathing in. As President Obama said, we recognize if you look at history, the course of history, we can step back and there's zigzags, and sometimes it felt like we were moving forward and other times it felt like we were moving back. But if we look at this great grand experiment, this 242-year experiment called the United States of America, we can see the trajectory has been more progress than regress. Yes. And so what if what we're experiencing right now is a blip on the timeline? Yes. Or what if what we're experiencing right now is actually an opportunity for us to take a quantum leap? Because actually what this man has brought forth in our desire, what this man has brought forth in our recognizing what we want to hear a president talk about and what we want a cabinet to look like and we want the feeling tone of this nation to be, what we are going to do now is take a quantum leap away from the hate, away from the division, and leap into a place of unity and division which is rooted in the very ideas and ideals of this country, even if they weren't fully practicing it at the moment. We understand that the documents that were written are transcendent. They speak to a much higher ideal and a way of life that has everything to do with what we're talking about today. And so when we understand this, we sang the song, Toward Our Wholeness. All of life is a movement toward our wholeness. And as I said, that song was, of course, based on this verse, but also there were two poems that inspired it. Many of you know, because we share this often in 4Ts, The Guest House by Rumi. And, you know, when we talk about all of life being a movement toward our wholeness, we realize that that's not always going to look the way we think it's going to look, right? Rumi writes in The Guest House, he says, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. He goes on further, he says, the dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. So this is the other thing, as the sage, knowing that all life is a movement toward your wholeness, you don't shut the door to the unwanted thing. Because you recognize that life is like Play-Doh. It can be molded into anything that you want. And then I was also inspired by D.H. Lawrence, and I want to close with this poem. Song of a Man Who Has Come Through. In that section of the song we say, welcome them in, they are angels sent from beyond. And again, that whole imagery of the door and welcoming was inspired by Rumi, but it was also inspired by this. And I invite you to hear these words. Not I, but the wind that blows through me. A fine wind is blowing the new direction of time. If only I let it bear me, carry me, if only it carry me. If only I am sensitive, subtle, oh delicate, a winged gift. If only, most lovely of all, I yield myself and am borrowed by the fine, fine wind that takes its course through the chaos of the world. Like a fine and exquisite chisel, a wedge blade inserted. If only I am keen and hard like the sheer tip of a wedge, driven by invisible blows, the rock will split. We shall come at the wonder, we shall find the Hesperides. Oh, for the wonder that bubbles into my soul. I would be a good fountain, a good wellhead, would blur no whisper, spoil no expression. What is the knocking? What is the knocking at the door in the night? It is somebody wants to do us harm. No, no. It is three strange angels. Admit them. Admit them. And so as I look back at these words today, I make my prayer, if only I let it bear me, carry me, if only it carry me, if only I am sensitive, subtle, oh delicate, a winged gift, if only most lovely of all, I yield myself and am borrowed. See, life is asking something of us. As we have experienced the murders in this country, as we have experienced the attempted murders in this country, as we are seeing the divisiveness, and as we are about to vote in a few days, there's something that's being asked of us, and we have the opportunity to allow ourselves, to yield ourselves and allow ourselves to be borrowed. It's the wisdom of St. Francis of Assisi when he says, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, I sow love. Where there is injury, I pardon, I forgive. Where there is sadness, I will be joy. Make me an instrument of your peace. I invite everybody to stand in this moment. To the sage, all of life is a movement toward our wholeness. And so in this moment, we take a deep breath in and we breathe out. Mother, Father, God, I am so grateful and thankful. I am grateful and thankful for the opportunities of life. For life is a continuous ebb and flow, and is a continuous calling, a continuous knocking, a continuous opportunity to allow ourselves to be borrowed by you. Allow your greatest expression to express through us as healing, as healers, as free minds, and as whole people, whole beings. So right here and right now, we open the door within our very own heart. We open up the door and we allow forgiveness to be. We open up the door and we allow love to rule our lives. Love alone rules my life. We open up the door in this moment and we allow this idea of perfect God, perfect human, perfect being to be our idea. We put our attention on the blueprint. We put our attention on your thoughts about ourselves and about our nation and about what's possible for us. Because we recognize that somewhere along the way, collectively, we forgot what was truly possible for this nation. We forgot what was truly possible for each and every one of us. And we got caught up in the visual differences between ourselves. And we got caught up in the perceived differences in our styles of worship. And we got caught up in the perceived differences on the days we worship. And we got caught up in all of these meaningless things, not remembering the great unity which is always being reflected in our bodies and in the cosmos. So we bring ourselves back to the great unity and we say yes to it. We allow the healing to take place. We've received enough diagnoses, and so we allow the healing to take place right now. And those of us that are here on this spiritual path seeking to create the world that works for everyone, we affirm, I am the healing. We recognize that God can only do for this nation what it can do through this nation and through its citizens. We declare and decree that I am the healing. I am the healing. Wherever we go, wherever we walk, whatever conversations we are in, whatever store we may be in, we recognize that we are being called to be something great in this moment, and we affirm, I am the healing. I am the healing. And to that we say, amen. Amen. Ashe. Ashe. And so it is. So it is. So it is. Thank you, God.